Welcome to the Rethinking Revelation podcast, where we engage the Bible and Christian tribalism at full speed like a Mack truck heading toward a deer in headlights. We are on a mission to discover and deliver the goods of God's Word to its destination, with as few pit stops as necessary and as much coffee as is humanly possible to consume.
What are you kidding? We got us an awesome podcast here.
Welcome back to another exciting adventure of Rethinking Revelation. I'm your host, Travis Finley. This is episode 76. We have a returning guest, Sam Frost, and also with us to discuss Sam's trek through his eschatological escapades is John Sedlak. And our conversation was done over the phone while I was driving using our handy-dandy tape-a-call, and we had some snafus along the way. So sit back, grab your cup of joe, and enjoy.
Well, here we are with Rethinking Revelation, back for a follow-up conversation with Sam Frost. And Sam, I asked you if you wouldn't mind opening the table discussion with perhaps, why don't you tell us, I suppose, your transition into a full preterist hermeneutic from a traditional, and then your transition back out. Don't make it extensive, but just kind of tell us what it was that persuaded you to move in that direction, and then what was it that persuaded you to move back out?
Well, yeah, it's rather involved, but I guess the main part of it, as I've always stated, was coming into Reformed theology during my junior year in Bible college. And from that, I came across, Gary North, and this was like 1987, 88, somewhere around there. I came across Gary North and Jordan and David Chilton, and started calling these guys and talking to them and reading everything they were doing, and got involved in what is called, historic preterism. And
okay, so why don't we talk about that real quick, because that's not a term that's normally used in the vernacular today. Usually we have partial, we have full. So what is your distinction with?
Well, the historical word was preterism has been around for a long time. It was just called the preterist view. You can find this all the way back almost to the 18th century. You can find a few references where they would call it Preterism, just means past. And all that it meant then was just, people that viewed a good deal of prophecy as past. Not all of it, but a good deal of it. So that's just all that the word meant.
So what I hear you saying is that typically what we call partial preterism is what you meant.
Yeah, that was a word we started using the term partial preterism to differentiate, because there was a huge argument that still kind of goes on today about using the term where we didn't like the word full preterist. So, we were saying, well, we're the true preterist, and then all this bunch of other stuff. But historically, technically, the word preterism just refers to we came up with this idea of partial and full, and that was probably around 1999, somewhere around there, when that partial preterism stuff started coming into. Because that's the only way we could differentiate. If someone said they were preterists, it's like, well, are you a partial preterist or are you a full preterist? So full preterism then became its own thing.
Okay,
But,
so go back to those late 80s then, and just help us to, what was it about an historic preterist perspective that was persuasive and convincing for you?
Well, in Bible college and then going on doing my Greek and going into critical studies, of course, you're reading the historical critical academians of the day, and you see that a good deal of them understood in context of Second Temple Judaism and all of that. So it just fits in with the hermeneutic of understanding Jesus in his own milieu, in his own time, seeking, this kind of thing. And then you get into start reading the pseudepigraphal works, the apocryphal, Christian apocryphal, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it just made sense. It's, it still does to me. It just makes sense. I've been in the church all my life, and I came mainly from a dispensationalist background. So I could never separate certain things that I had and I never challenged, never questioned, of my dispensational upbringing. So when I came across Max King and started reading him and talking to him, I still had in my mind, prophecy is an all or nothing thing. You can't break up prophecy. It's either all fulfilled or it's not. And full preterism, like Max King, sort of operates in the same way. So I could just sit right in with that. I thought it was wrong to say that this over here is fulfilled, but this over here is not fulfilled. So that's the kind of either or thing I was operating in, and I didn't assume that, I didn't question that, I just brought that right on in. And so full preterism went hand in hand, pointing out the inconsistencies of the partial preterists. Full preterism just kind of fell into place, and once I understood what Max King was saying, I was following John Stuart Russell, and then I followed Ed Stevens, but I couldn't buy into what Ed Stevens was saying, and then I started reading Max King and finally understood what King was saying over dinner one night with him, and we were talking. We'd been talking for about a year, and finally got to meet him and finally understood what he was saying, and I'm like, okay,
so let's do that real quick.
Go along with that.
Tell us a little bit about what was difficult for you to swallow with Ed Stevens' perspective, and then talk a little bit about what was the strong points of Max King's dinner chats with you.
Stevens' view is still operating under the more or less majority of people that read 1 Corinthians 15. He's still trying to operate within an individual bodily resurrection of sorts going on there. And so he sees what a good deal of people, majority-wise, historically have seen in that text. It's just that he has that fulfilled in AD 70, which means that he doesn't have a visible rapture or any of that kind of stuff, so he has a rapture taking place. And, right. I had issues with that. I thought, well, that's got to be documented, just to say that this happened and no one would have seen it or heard it or said anything about it, that's a stretch. And
with your change in views out of preterism, where are you now with the rapture? I'm curious.
Well, I don't believe in a pre-trib or any. I don't get into any of those kinds of that's all dispensational stuff. I'm not a premillennialist. Rapture to me is just simply the descent of the Lord, and Paul says those who are alive during the time of the finality of all things will be immediately changed. So that's all that is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So,
and Stevens was seeing that, and that to put such an event in AD 70, literally, with me and Preston and William Bell and King and others, we just couldn't go that route. But we were stuck because we have to have all prophecy fulfilled in AD 70. That's the box. You can't get out of the box. So King's other alternative was the only other alternative. If full preterism was correct, then King's view was the only other alternative. And I'm operating again under a lot of assumptions that I did not question, that I do question now.
Yeah, I totally understand the transition in and out. So I'm sympathetic. I've got a question for you that more theological. Do you take any of the book to be written after 70 AD? It's just a curious question.
Any of what book?
Anything in the New Testament canon.
Oh, if possible. If you go just simply by a historic view, if you were just doing detective work, as a historic theology, there, good evidence is there that some books were written after AD 70. It's still very much debated. The part of the problem is just we don't have all the information. And so we're left with, piecemealing a lot of stuff together. That's just the problem of history.
Yeah, like even with full preterists that insist that everything was written before 70 AD, I don't think I could commit to John's gospel being written before 70 AD. I personally think it's written after.
There's a lot of problems with that, and there's very strong evidence that John was written after AD 70. Very, very, very strong. And there's equally strong evidence for Revelation after 70. But if you read somebody like Margaret Barker, she sees strands of things going on there, that these were revelations that were given over a period of time and maybe finally compiled after AD 70. There's room for this kind of speculatory things because we only have so many facts. And now we're left to just string together a lot of facts, and there's a lot of gaps there that we just don't have the information. We don't know. And so,
how do you personally feel with so gut feeling? This is not like an academic answer, I'm curious, but on this podcast we try to get lots of different perspectives and just hear people out because there's a plurality of voices in the Christian church, and we don't talk with each other, we talk past each other. So this is another honest question. When it comes to the church and the traditions they've passed on, they formed into creeds, they formed into confessions. There's a lot of uniformity.
Oh, sure.
But what uniformity is there, which we can connect with today? Do you have some doubts? Do you have no doubts about error in those views? Because sometimes full preterists appeal to that. They say, well, let's just human tradition. But what are your thoughts about the Spirit of God leading the church?
It's more than tradition. If you follow out with the outpouring of the Spirit and what that meant, and the bringing in of knowledge on the basis of what Paul particularly was saying, to have this kind of end in AD 70 when Jesus himself, the giving of the Spirit, is going to bring about unity. He prays this in John 17. Paul explicitly states that you may be of one mind and of one. He's literally in the Greek there is that you speak and say the same things and you believe the same things. You're able to write it out and you're able to say it and you all agree on it. You all understand what it means.
Yeah.
So that seems to be something like in the Creed of Israel, where they were united under a written code. That's what united them, was having this written thing that they could unite and appeal to and say, here, this is what we believe in. And it seems to me that from all four quarters of what was going on in the massive, massive battles, sometimes even bloodshed, over what these things were, and to have these things codified, to which earned the submission of the whole church universal, that yes, this is what we believe. That to me is an amazing feat in such a second century world, third century world of such variegation going on. Just the same as today. There's just the variegations going on today. So anything to me, I start first now with unity. Where do we unite? Where is it that we unite? Because that, to get a bunch of sinful people from various quarters from all over the world to unite on something, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's right. That's a miracle. That can only be done. It's not as if the creeds haven't been, radically taken apart and exposed. I don't believe in the creeds because they're the creeds. I've thoroughly have gone through them over the years and have come to accept that what they were wrestling with, they were after the truth just as much as I was. Athanasius was after truth just as much as anybody else was. He was a devout Christian follower of Christ. Sacrificed a great deal for this. So he's just a believer just like me and you. He's not some conspiracy theory trying to, through fear of religion, to motivate the masses so that he can collect a lot of money. That's not what was going on there. That's not what was going on with these guys at all.
Do you have room for flexibility in theory or in practice for opening up discussions, even if it leads to narrowing preteristic verses where only a select few are future? Are you Are you trying to be like accommodate so that we actually remove more full preterist like 70 AD readings to be more future, or are you fine with the few that are controversial? An obvious one's going to be the 1,000 years, because 1 Corinthians 15 and the 1,000 years is something that Travis and I dialogued about. So we have a meeting of the minds, and so he understands that if there's going to be a hill to die on, I think that those are two chapters which are hills to die on, but it's difficult for me to find other ones.
I mean, like 1 Thessalonians 4, I think dovetails nicely with 2 Corinthians 5, which dovetails nicely with 1 Corinthians 15, which goes very nicely with Romans 8, and falls right in again with that whole millennium. This was one of the hardest things that we did, and I wrote papers on this at the time, and Don and I used to talk about it. If you read John Noe, where he's doing the same thing, he's truncating the millennium to around 30-some odd years between the outpouring of the Spirit in 70 AD. I defended that. It was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do, but I had to bite the bullet and go along with, this has to be the case. And we worked that thing every which way but loose through Ezekiel and the pattern of Ezekiel, and saying, here's the pattern, and this seems to be what happens after the millennium, and it seems to be that the little seasons after millennium, and that's the same little season of the times and half. So all of this happened in 70 AD, therefore it had to happen after the 1,000 years. So we're stuck in this. We can't get out of it.
So, I agree with this. Don't you think that there's a lot of full preterist interpretations about what the future must be like, and aren't you suspicious of them as though there are alternatives to the full preterist?
Yeah, and that's the millennium was a hard thing, but we went with it. But now, where I'm at now, and I look back, I'm like this. You can't take what 1,000 years is and shrink that down to 30-some years. That's just that goes against every rule of hermeneutics that we all agree on. It goes against everything. And so it's a red flag. It's like there's something wrong here.
As a red flag, do you take, let's talk about the millennium. Do you take the spiritual resurrection and physical resurrection view?
Yeah, I still think that John 5 is kind of a template for what's going on there in the first resurrection, second resurrection, first death, second death. I think John 5 is kind of a template.
So apart from there being the full preterist movement, because I've said this in another podcast before here on Rethinking Revelation, that I don't consider myself part of that camp.
Right.
I don't fit in, but I'm as close to a full preterist without wanting to be in that camp. So when I think about this, I still think about unity. And so to what point do we dialogue where you you used to be a full preterist, can you still see people that are not part of that camp as Christians that are just wrestling?
Well, yeah. I mean, as long as there's an openness there, when you start talking to people like Don Preston and many people like that, they're shut off. That's it. This is their view. That's the highway. That's it. There is no other alternative. There is no other interpretation. There's no other way to look at it. And I'm like, well...
It's like if they start a whole new church, and they divide from their InStore church. I'm all about conversation within the InStore church, wrestling with the Bible. In fact, I'm so firm in the Bible that I actually think that the Bible trumps tradition. As awkward of a conversation as that creates within my tradition. I come from an Anglican background. So I think to myself, we need to take the Bible seriously, and we need to talk to each other, and we can't just say, well, the Pope said this, or the Council said this. We need to talk about the Bible and tradition. How do we make sense of the life of the church?
Well, the argument is, Ken, Dr. Gentry, and the way that it's posited is, of course, the Bible in the Westminster Confession is the supreme authority. It's quite explicit in what it states. So the Scriptures are the supreme authority. However, when you have such a massive agreement in the unity of the Apostles, Nicene, Chalcedon, these aren't creeds that were just slapped together. by a couple of guys. These were creeds that were painfully over a couple of centuries put together. Our whole basis of hermeneutics comes out of the idea of Christology and Trinity, because and I was getting ready to write something on this, everything in the Trinity was basically from Apollinarianism, Arianism, all these different views were coming at their own little proof text. Arianism was very popular at a time because when you read what Arius believes in what he was saying, he had proof texts, and they were problem texts. When Jesus was praying to the Father, how can God pray to God? You know, he had certain texts that we had to look at, but yet we have these other texts over. So what grew out of this is we have to have every single text and align every single text where there is no contradiction to any text. That's Athanasius. He spells this out. That's what he is attempting to do, so that we contradict no text of Scripture as it touches upon this issue, but uniformly brings in every Arius' view, Apollinarius' concerns, all these concerns without contradiction to the Bible. That's what they were doing. So the Trinity teaches me the basis of hermeneutics. If 1 Corinthians 15 is talking about the resurrection of the dead, and I believe that it is, that didn't happen in AD 70. So whatever is being said about it is near, it's at hand, and all, I've got to square that with another clear block of text over here, instead of destroying 1 Corinthians 15 so that I can have, because now I sound like Arius. I'm just wanting my proof text. Well, a true eschatology is going to bring everything to bear, all of it. And that's what I didn't see going on.
Yeah, I'm with you, but like, at what point do we treat not the full preterist camp where they're closed-minded, but the open-minded, close to full preterist camp like myself, as not an Arian?
Like I said, I'm open to, I'm preteristic and still in many ways. I mean, of course, I believe in the finality of history. I believe that an end 1,000 years, Revelation 20:11 through 15 is not fulfilled. That did not happen. I don't believe that I don't believe we're living in the new heavens and the new earth by any stretch of the imagination. If this is it, you can have it. Yeah. I mean, you can have it. But so those are certain big issues that anymore today, having come out of full preterism and went that whole route, and then coming back at, I've come to more appreciate resurrection of the dead ever than I did being raised in the church and hearing about it up until I left full preterism. Today, I understand the doctrine of resurrection of the dead and appreciate it more than I ever have in my entire life, as to why Paul was preaching resurrection of the dead and why he was stressing that over and over and over again in Christ. And he kept saying, and so, because in traditional Baptist churches or what you go to hear, resurrection's just this kind of add-on thing that happens at the end of time somewhere down the line. Oh no, not for Paul. No. Resurrection's not this thing that just happens at the end of time. No. Resurrection is something that you are involved in right now. And it took on a whole different meaning for me. I was like, man, that's something.
Let me interject. Let me interject with a question for you, Sam, to clarify on. If 1 Corinthians 15 is about the resurrection of the dead, and you understand that to mean resurrection of physical bodies coming out of the grave at the end of time, and yet you say, oh no, we participate in the resurrection now, aren't you changing the meaning of the resurrection? Does that make sense?
No, there's first resurrection, there's second resurrection. And there's the spirit that raised the Lord Jesus from the dead, physically raised him from the dead, is the same spirit that is at work within us, and shall give life to your mortal bodies.
Right.
So, I'm already, and because I'm in Christ and he is the first fruits, then Paul can say you have the first fruit of the Spirit. He didn't say the first fruits of Christ, he says the first fruit of the Spirit. So that participating in the life of the Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, who is the first fruit, I am already participating in resurrection life. Not that I've already attained unto resurrection, but I press on to that which I hope to attain. Paul is clearly making a distinction between what he already has and what he's going to get.
What are your personal views that you've worked out since leaving full preterism to what happens when you die in Christ? I'm just curious. It's a learning.
There I've launched into a study of the really tricky passage of 2 Corinthians 5, 1 through 10. I think there Paul's dealing with an intermediate state. When you die, when you're absent from the body, you're present with the Lord. But that's not the end of it. In 10, he concludes it with, we shall all stand before the judgment seat. Well, now, wait a minute. How in the world am I absent from the body if I die and I'm present with the Lord, and then I'm going to stand? I thought I'm already with the Lord, so what's this whole standing before the Lord business? Is that, well, that's resurrection of the dead. And he mentions body there, to be judged through the deeds done through the body. Paul has this kind of two-stage thing going on, and N.T. Wright is one of the better ones, Surprised by Hope, that really picks up on this. He says, it's life after death. That's what Paul is saying. When you die and go to heaven, that's not the end of it. Our goal is not to go to heaven. The whole goal is heaven on earth. And that's, again, Judaism. That's Jesus when he makes the prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That was Jewish. That was thoroughly Jewish. They knew what that meant.
So deep in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, in which I'm becoming increasingly familiar. I'm not Orthodox or anything like that, but
right.
Becoming increasingly familiar. There's been a long-standing Western and Eastern tradition that even with that intermediate stage, they're participating in the renewal of the cosmos. Is that something you've studied, or something you would maybe instinctively?
I lean more towards where Greek Orthodox takes a lot of that. I mean, Greek Orthodox is the more I get into it, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and what they're doing there, and I've read through those, and reading the liturgical heavenly and what Greek Orthodox liturgy is actually doing is attempting to bring about as feeble as possible a life of heaven on earth. That's what they're doing in each Sunday worship service. You can see that. It's quite, this was one of the more fascinating of reading, like, again, Margaret Barker and others, the Temple Theology, G.K. Bill and these guys. David Chilton, same in Days of Vengeance. Chilton, that's what's interesting. Everyone's talking about G.K. Bill and everybody. And I'm like, but Chilton was doing this back in the 80s. And nobody was reading him, but he was already doing this stuff, this temple theology. But Revelation is a divine liturgical church service. You got the incense, you got your candles, you got your altar, you got the Lord's table, you got the whole 9 yards going on there with the worship of the chorus of the angels and everything. And it follows that very route. And interesting, our worship service from the Didache on, we can see that grew out of the synagogue and follows this kind of threefold pattern of worship that comes straight out of the Bible. So Greek Orthodox theology, with all that they're doing, and even Roman Catholic liturgy, is trying to bring heaven on earth. That's its whole point. When you enter into you see all the saints and the angels, and you're in heaven. You're entering into heaven. It's not heaven. So let's never mistake that. It's not heaven. But that's the image and the liturgy that they're trying to create.
Yeah, there's a lot of legends and stuff which are reasonably cheesy. They begin with even the disembodied state, so they're not full preterists. But they believe the saints are alive. There are some who under Christ are reigning like the angels and are part of renewing earth until the end comes. I'm very sympathetic to that view. I think that makes sense of eternal life even with a disembodied spiritual existence, a spiritual resurrection. That's why I tend to be sympathetic towards that tradition. It still at least makes it so that we don't have to guess about floating on clouds and playing harps. So Travis holds a view. Travis, you can correct me. At least he speculated that maybe they just fall asleep until the resurrection.
I mean, I don't hold to a soul sleep.
But isn't it interesting how we're part of
I asked John Calvin what he thought about soul sleep.
What do you think of it?
He tore it up. He tore it up and had no good words to say about it at all. As typical of John Calvin, anything he disagreed with, he just tore it. But he didn't like the whole soul sleep thing. It doesn't, falling asleep, to me refers to the recumbrance of the body. It's strictly a reference, he's fallen asleep with the Father. It's a Hebrew phrase, and he fell asleep with his fathers and he died, and Abraham died and he fell asleep with his father, And so you see it all throughout. It's just it's a euphemism for the reclining of the body, that the body has slept. So I don't know how far I would, venture with, for me, in my view, nobody has been raised from the dead yet except Christ. That's, Christ is the only human being that has been risen from the dead.
Oh, so you don't even think Old Testament text?
No, and another thing that I question, and I've, going back and looking at, is this whole notion of this Sheolic realm of Sheol and hate, and there's a lot of now that I'm reading more into it, that totally disagree with that whole view. Sheol is just the grave. That's all it is. And what you see in like Isaiah, who talks about, he might be picking up what the Israelites in their pagan influences, the cults that many of the Israelites were involved in. Isaiah's picking up these kind of Shaddiq things and saying, and kind of taunting them with it. Like, when you go down to death and you hang out there, you think your life's going to be any better, but your life's going to be a shadow. It's going to be nothing, according to the stuff that you guys believe in. But to say that Isaiah is entertaining that Abraham, who was declared righteous by God himself, or Noah, who found favor in the eyes of God, was wandering around as a shadow in some Sheolic, horrible place, is, and even very strongly in the Reformed faith, Calvin rejected that and said that cannot be entertained. That Abraham himself, the father of faith, is in some Sheolic, shadowy, dismal, horrible, miserable realm. That cannot be entertained.
I would reject that too. What's your thoughts about the life that we see with Transfiguration? Moses and Elijah.
Yeah, no, I think Moses and Elijah were there. No, it wasn't a vision. I think he saw them. And what else says he talked to them? They were having a conversation.
Well, how does that fit in your view? I'm just more or less wanting to learn your view.
They were alive in what, I guess, for lack of a better term, the soulish realm, that they were alive. God is the God of the living, but they were not yet raised from the dead. But they were alive. I think the 24 elders, these aren't angels. These are they're presbyteroi. They're elders. These are human beings. Only human beings are called elders. You never heard of an elder. Angels don't age. You don't hear of old angels. I'm 52 years old. I've been in the angel business for a long time. Elders apply to people. So these 24 elders, who are these elders? Where did they come from? Well, they're human beings, number one. They're the ones that have been given thrones. They're sitting in judgment with Christ, with the Lamb, and with God. Many scholars think that they're there's 12 apostles and the 12 patriarchs. And so it's not told who they are, but they're from all accounts, they're human beings, and they're on thrones, and they're judging.
Yeah, there's like an openness. And what's your take on Revelation chapter 4 and 5 being a sequence where the heavenly temple, those elders, they cast down their crowns, they vacate their thrones, and then the saints, at the end of Revelation in 20, they ascend those thrones.
Yeah, all power and glory is given. And again, here's another thing. Only human beings are promised crowns. Angels are never promised crowns. You never see an angel with a crown on his head.
Okay.
Only the elders have crowns.
Let me interject real quick just for clarification, because I'm driving and I don't have a Bible in front of me. I have a knee-jerk reaction to what we're discussing right now, because if we have human beings in chapters 4 and 5 on thrones, and then they cast down their crowns and vacate the thrones, and then other human beings take thrones in chapter 20, and if Jesus is the first human in heaven, then how can we have humans in heaven that are on thrones who vacate thrones?
Well, the answer to that, he's the first human being raised from the dead in heaven. There's no prohibition against the first. Right. There's no prohibition against souls being. I mean, what happened to Elijah and Enoch? I mean, did they? So were they raptured up into Sheol? God just said, "Hey, I'm going to take you right on into Sheol." It's unfathomable.
Wait, pause for both of you, because this might be an area where I would disagree with both of you, but we need to converse about this. I'm familiar enough to know that Eastern Christian tradition has looked at its ancient Jewish roots, and there's a belief that Elijah and Abraham were in a place of bliss for the dead. It was not heaven.
There's you have Abraham's bosom. You have that other tradition. It wasn't Sheolic. It wasn't miserable, but it wasn't heaven either. Kind of like a second heaven or something.
Yeah.
This is all these areas. I would not be closed-minded to any of this kind of stuff, and I'm certainly not going to be dogmatic on a lot of it.
All right, so this is what fascinates me, Sam, because there was a day not long ago you were a Bible-believing Christian, and you felt the urge that the scriptures were clear enough on most issues to be a full preterist. So, like, at what point can we be sympathetic to other Christians that are in that mindset that you were in, and still love them and not treat them as like they're Arians? You know what I mean? Like there's room to be open-minded, but still be sure. You believe?
I have still many full preterists. I mean, I dialogue daily with many that are full preterists. And many of them have come out. Some of them are re-looking at things. That's really all that I'm trying to. And if they're open to that, to the dogmatic full preterist, it's very hard to hold a conversation because. I was. I moved my family and sold my business and started a church. I mean, I was sold out to this stuff. So, but looking back, when I really started, teaching, 1999 and up through about 10 years and in the conferences and the lectures and doing all this and with Don Preston, and we were putting on all these things and doing all this kind of stuff. I was just trying to. Here's what I thought initially, is that full preterism and the problems that we have of eschatology, full preterism is a highlight of the historic Christian faith. Full preterism actually embellishes and brings about a fuller understanding of that which we have already understood. It clarifies it. And so it doesn't break from the historic faith, it enhances it. That was my sincerity going into full preterism, is that I have found something here that is going to help usher the church into its original understanding of its mission and what it is supposed to do. And at the time, as a full preterist, I always was seeing the post-AD 70 as the fulfillment of, and I called this was a phrase that I used, was ongoing fulfillment. And I use this phrase quite often. You can see it in my older writings, where it says, what we're doing now is Jesus is riding on the white horse, conquering the nations, and that's what we're about doing right now, until we shall conquer all nations. A lot of full preterists didn't like that, and I preached it anyway, and they stuck with, because I was full preterist. So that started unwinding because there cannot be any ongoing fulfillment. All prophecy is fulfilled in AD 70, period. That didn't sit. I was like, but what do we, look, you've got a big giant elephant in the room called 2,000 years of church history. What do you do with this? Well, the answer is that we're coming, Israel only. It's all wrapped up in 80-70, universalism. It just went on, and that's what alarm started, like, there's something wrong here.
All right, so let me interject here because this is where I fit in, I think, in terms of what I've been doing in my trek in the past 15 years. And I heard you say now, Sam, what I called myself early on, and that was a post-millennial preterist. So I believe that prop has been completed, but I also believe that the theology of post-millennialism is true. So for me, I'm going to affirm what you just said and say, yeah, that's what I called myself. I said, because I was trying to make a distinction between a full preterist view and my post-millennial affiliation. And so I said, well, in order for me to communicate to the post-millennialists that I'm not a threat to them, I'm post-millennial. But I'm also affirming the fact that I cannot deny that I'm persuaded strongly that the understanding of what happened in the New Testament is what I've now termed analogous to the yellow brick road leading to the Emerald City. The prophetic work is the yellow brick road. The Emerald City is that which he was anticipating, so that if we cross the threshold from, well, not we, if Paul crosses the threshold from the yellow brick road, which he was doing as a Pharisee, had he not on the road to Damascus humbled himself and confessed Christ, he would have perished in AD 70. Whether physically or symbolically, it doesn't matter. He would have perished.
Right.
He would not have entered into the new creation. Now, what's interesting is I've also then adapted C.S. Lewis's little further up and farther in motif. And that is that when we cross into the kingdom, we see what's going on. We see the activity of the kingdom. We see the presence of the church in the world. But we discover the farther and farther we go in is that we're continuing to build and extend.
And this is where T-Mobile failed me. So what I was basically affirming was the same thing that Sam Frost had said that he was doing that was upsetting his tribe of preterism. And I was explaining my analogy to what C.S. Lewis says in his Narnia Chronicles about further up and farther in. And that is that once you cross the yellow brick road into the Emerald City exists. But as you walk farther and farther into the Emerald City, you discover that you begin to participate in extending that Emerald City further and further on through history. And I believe that that's the nature of what we see in the prophetic hope of the kingdom and in the New Testament expression of that. So I think we're going to stop here for the time being, and we'll pick up with the rest of the conversation in the next episode of Rethinking Revelation. Once again, I'm your host, Travis Finley. Please make sure you visit on iTunes and give us a good review. Tweet or visit on Facebook at Rethinking Revelation, and then also rethinkingrevelation.com. Until next time.